is very active, obviously, on climate and the way clean energy ties into that. So he made a message for us on that issue. So let's go ahead and your attention to the screens for Climate Envoy John Kerry.
Hello, everyone. While I can't be with you in person for this critical business summit, I really wanted to send along my very best wishes to Prime Minister Chin, to my friends at the American Chamber in Vietnam, and to all of you on a successful meeting. As you know, I just returned from a very productive and successful trip to Vietnam, where my team and I were honored to meet with a range of leaders and officials all across the government. All of us agreed now is the time to build on Vietnam's climate ambitions, including its new net zero 2050 goal and its commitment at COP26 to move away from unabated new coal power and work toward phasing down existing coal. We also talked about the devastating impacts to people and places that we're already seeing from climate change in Vietnam, including in the Mekong Delta, as well as elsewhere. The science, my friends, is clear. All around the world, we must turn words into actions to limit total warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and help people and countries to adapt to that warmer world, even as we are fighting to avoid, according to the scientists, the worst consequences of the climate crisis. My friends, the good news is this is not a transition to be feared. It is a transformation that we should all be ready to seize. And that is especially true in Vietnam, where we can create jobs and grow the economy through innovation and clean, sustainable investments. I want you to know that Vietnam is blessed with the remarkable natural assets of a smart grid. You have unbelievable hydro available to you. You have amazing wind up and down the coast and in the highlands, and you have great sun in some of the provinces closest to Ho Chi Minh City. You also have some gas that you can use. So Vietnam has the ability to have an incredibly clean and powerful grid. And we need the private sector to be fully engaged in shaping and accelerating that work, in greening operations, in bringing finance to the table, and investing in projects that will benefit everyone in Vietnam, and indeed everyone on the planet for generations to come. So let's continue to work together to accelerate Vietnam's clean energy transition, to promote policy and technology innovation, and especially to make Vietnam an example for the rest of the world. It's there for the making.
Thank you, Climate Envoy Kerry. And our next speaker is actually the newest ABAC member, the U.S. participant in the business side of APEC. She was just named that, I think, about a week ago. Laura Lane is the Executive Vice President and Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at UPS, the company that ships all that stuff around. So she deals with public policy, government affairs, sustainability, communications, and runs their foundation. She's familiar to us not only at UPS, but she also had very senior roles at Citibank and at Time Warner. She served in the government earlier. She was a trade negotiator at USTR, did a lot of stuff on China's entry into WTO, the WTO Financial Services Agreement, the Telecommunications Agreement, WTO. She was a member of the U.S. Foreign Service and served at U.S. embassies in Bogota and Kigali. And again, we wanted her because she was the newest ABAC member and is going to be familiar to a lot of us since a lot of us follow APEC. So she wanted to talk a little bit about what her company is doing on sustainability and climate. So let's turn it over to Laura Lane.
Thank you to the Honorable John Kerry, our partners from the Foreign Commercial Service, government guests from the Asia-Pacific region, and all my friends at the American Chambers of Commerce of Asia-Pacific for this wonderful opportunity to be a part of this important event. I'm UPS Chief Corporate Affairs Officer Laura Lane, and I'm so honored to kick off today's discussion on infrastructure development, energy transition, and climate change. These topics are incredibly important for UPS and especially important in Asia. It's a key growth region for the global economy and central to our efforts to combat climate change. The pandemic reminded us of what we can achieve together, no matter the challenge or crisis. And we have to address climate change with that same sense of urgency and that same resolve. As economies and businesses rebuild their supply chains for greater resilience post-pandemic, private and public players must work together to do so sustainably. At UPS, we've pledged to be carbon neutral by 2050. We're innovating delivery methods for densely populated cities, investing in next-generation electric, hydrogen, and hybrid alternative fuel vehicles, and recruiting the best and brightest talent to lead the innovation efforts needed to deliver a greener future for all. We're expanding our fleet of sustainability delivery vehicles on both the ground and in the air, using cleaner burning fuel and building more environmentally friendly facilities around the world. For example, our delivery fleet in downtown Beijing and Xi'an is almost fully electrified, and our electric fleet is growing in Japan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, and we're just getting started. As a global company that flies to more than 220 countries and territories, we're committed to using 30% sustainable aviation fuel by 2035 if sufficient supplies exist, or leading innovation efforts that remove as much carbon as possible from our global air operations. We know that aviation is a major environmental challenge. That's why we need a global approach to fund and incentivize the development of sustainable aviation fuel so that we can scale it to be commercially viable. We also need to build capacity for Asia's fragmented freight industry. UPS is a proud founding member of Green Freight Asia, where we work closely with industry players across ASEAN and South Korea to reduce carbon emissions in the transportation industry. The easier it is to move goods around the world, the less time our vehicles spend on the ground and the fewer carbon emissions they emit. I want to specifically commend the U.S. government's push for the Smart Transport Asia program. This program will increase the efficiency and fluidity of transportation systems. It'll improve fuel economy standards and reduce energy consumption and emissions across Asia. Trade will also play a critical role in the deployment of green technologies. That's why we need international trade policy that encourages innovation and sustainable manufacturing. Here, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework and other regional initiatives will help increase collaboration and help develop greener and more efficient supply chains. Again, we all have to work together. So this isn't just a moment, but a movement to create a more sustainable world for everyone. I applaud all of you here today for all of your efforts. And please keep counting on UPS to do our part to move our world forward by delivering what matters. Have a successful and productive summit. Thank you.
You know, I have to mention and give myself a little bit of a plug too. UPS is funding some work we're doing with the Vietnam Chamber of Commerce in Cần Thơ to create a for-business, by-business network called the Mekong Resilience Business Network. And those guys are right now doing research on the impacts and responses of businesses to drought and salinization in the Mekong Delta. And they're planning in July a climate change and disaster risk reduction trade fair to kind of promote what companies can offer in terms of climate change mitigation and adaptation. But that's not where we're supposed to go today. And I want to start this discussion with a few comments. I don't know if many of you know this, but the first voluntary carbon credit was in 1989. That was a project that was originated by CARE, and it was an agroforestry project in Guatemala. And you may not know which company bought those credits. but we have them right here. It's AES. And that's important for us to think about because the Earth Summit, which started this whole UN process called the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, it happened in 1992. So at least one company was well ahead of its time in beginning to think about the impacts of climate change. Since 1992, however, and despite the efforts of the UN, CO2 in the atmosphere has gone from about 350 parts per million to 420. And you may not think that's much, but 170 years ago it was 250 parts per million. And it was about that level for 40,000 years or so. So then if we just take this, parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere as a key performance indicator, well, then what can we say about this process that underlines the UN efforts to work with governments? I think the key takeaway is that we really need corporations to be more firmly involved. Some of you know that really began to happen in 2017. And it was, in some ways, Hank Paulson and Michael Bloomberg who took on that mantle. And they did so as the US government pulled out of the Paris Agreement. And it's like if we're not in the Paris Agreement, it doesn't mean the end of the world. It means we're going to take our businesses and our leverage to kind of move forward. So at this time, there's more than 100 multinational corporations that have committed to the Net Zero Climate Pledge. And there's an organization called RE100, which assumed that they would have 100 members, agreeing to all renewable energy at some point in the near future. It now has 371 members. And the EU, which has been a great proponent of the UN's process, has decided itself to take on a market mechanism to reduce carbon emissions in a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which kind of creates a low carbon club that invites trading partners to join by abiding by its rules. All of this stuff is parallel to the UN process and business-led. And you may say, well, that's greenwashing. Some of it is greenwashing. Well, maybe some of it is greenwashing, but it's not all of it. And just thinking about it as greenwashing is a real mistake, because really, who has the resources and incentives for the transition? Many of the businesses here, they have a real advantage in promoting a low carbon transition. It's good for their business, it's good for their companies, it's good for the planet. And finally, I want to kind of end with something that Envoy Kerry said. There is a real sense of urgency in this. If you paid attention to the last IPCC report, it says that we have about 8 years to global net zero to avoid the worst catastrophes related to climate change. Not like the current ones have been very good either. With that, I want to turn it over to our panelists, and I'm going to introduce them now. I'm going to start with Dr. Ken Egg. Ken is the head of energy and environment policy for APEC in Japan at Amazon Web Services. James Meffin is the project treasury and finance director of AES. Stefano Scurati is director for Southeast Asia for Asia Group Advisors. And to my left, John Rockhold, international director for Vietnam Rare Earth. And I would like each of you to just give a very brief introduction, not more than 3 minutes, and you can see the clock right there. So I'm going to start with John, and I'm just going to go across.
Well, to save my voice, Adam, I think we have a tape that'll speak for me.
Yeah.
on this one? It is. Adam has it, yeah. Okay. Vietnam Rare Earth is a company that exports. Most people do not realize that Vietnam sits on the second largest deposits in the world of rare earth, just under China. However, Vietnam exports less than 1/4% of the annual production of rare earth, compared to 70% that is in the production by China, 15% by the U.S. What we want to do now is definitely we want to increase this production, and we're very much looking at to do this production in a trade between rare earth and gas as we both transition to a greener. We really hope that people and companies look at where this rare earth is coming from, especially as most corporations, if you look at it, are using rare earth. And it's really important to look at where the rare earth is coming and how it's being mined, and the whole circular economy about it and the impacts on the populations living around it. So this is what we hope to do in a much cleaner way here in Vietnam.
Thank you. Ken Haig from Amazon Web Services. For those who don't know, that's the cloud computing part of the Amazon family of businesses. We at Amazon have a 2040 net zero carbon goal. This was part of the climate pledge that we established in 2019 to reach the Paris Agreement targets 10 years early. We've been blessed to have over 300 other companies join us in just the past 2+ years that we've launched that effort. And so setting high ambition, I think, as John Kerry just mentioned, was the start. How do we implement that, I think, is a good topic for discussion here. I cover our energy policy work for the Asia-Pacific region. You may imagine that with cloud computing, energy use is a good part of our carbon footprint. So making sure that we are, first of all, not using energy that we don't need to, because the cleanest energy we can use is that which we don't in the first place. Maximizing energy efficiency where we can is a good part of our focus. But for the remainder, we've pledged to purchase 100% renewable energy. When I joined Amazon 2 years ago, the goal was a 2030 100% renewable energy goal. We've since upped our ambition. We're on a path to meet that by 2025. But I can say honestly that Asia-Pacific region is one of the most challenging regions for us to meet that renewable energy goal. So that's what I'm focused on, and I'm happy to talk more about this on the panel. Thanks.
Hi, all. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. My name is James Meffin. I'm with the AES Corporation. So AES is a global energy provider where we have about 30,000 megawatts in operation across 14 countries. We're an active investor in Vietnam. We have a $2.1 billion power plant that's in operations, and are looking at expanding our investment further in LNG to gas, LNG to power project, the Somi Power Project. AES has developed in the U.S. a 24/7 model for carbon-free energy, and the opportunity here in Vietnam for CFE as well as for LNG as a transition is the reason why we're here and why Vietnam is a priority market for AES. And we think there's lots of opportunity, in terms of being able to provide our corporate clients globally with similar products in Vietnam eventually. And so we're very excited to, be a part of the growth of this market and the commitments that the government help support the commitments that the government has made with respect to COP26 and their energy transition.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stefano Scoratti. I'm with Asia Group Advisors, which is a public affairs, public policy advisory firm. We help businesses invest in the region and navigate the policy landscape. Energy transition is a big topic for a lot of our clients, and of course, it's a big topic for the region. We know that by 2040, energy demand in the region will go up by 60%, And the vast majority of the energy mix in the region is represented by non-renewable energy sources, coal being a very large one. So if you take Indonesia as an example, that accounts to almost 80% of its energy mix. So we're not starting from a great place in the region. But at the same time, I think it's a topic which is experiencing extraordinary dynamism. Right? If you look at the level of commitments that policy leaders have been making over the past 24 months, I would say, the activity has been exceptional. So staying on Indonesia, they're looking at going carbon neutral by 2060, decommissioning coal by the 2040s. So there's great policy momentum which is happening. A big part is going to be just getting the political economy right and the market issues solved. So very excited to be on this panel, learn from peers on the technologies that are becoming available and discuss more about the policy.
Thanks a lot, Stefano. Just encourage people to keep their microphone a little bit closer when you speak. So I'm going to start with Ken. And, I'm just kind of struck by Amazon's carbon emissions reduction goals. You're on a pathway to powering operations 100% by renewables by 2025. And that's 5 years ahead of your target. And actually, since 2021, you've been the world's largest purchaser of renewable energy. In your experience, what are some of the biggest challenges in the Asia-Pacific economy, both for the public and private sector, in achieving net zero emissions? And what can government and industry do to be more aggressive in reaching those climate targets?
Thank you for the question. I think, so the first step is setting that ambition. And I think we've all heard that Vietnam has set a great ambition of reaching net zero carbon by 2050. Just to put that in perspective, that's the same date that Japan, South Korea, and more recently Singapore have. So compared to more developed economies, Vietnam's setting a very high bar. It's ahead of where China and Indonesia, for example, have set their bars for 2060. The next step is acting on that ambition. Yeah. And the same for us as private sector. We need to identify how we're going to be getting to that path. As a part of the climate pledge, what we've done is there's three major components to the climate pledge. First, setting the ambition, making sure you're getting to net zero carbon by 2040 or earlier. Second is doing regular reporting on progress towards that goal. And then third is focusing on direct decarbonization where possible. And then for the remainder, only looking at carbon offsets that are credible, permanent, socially responsible, and nature-based where possible. So those are all areas that we're focused on. I mentioned that for ourselves, one of the areas that we're really focusing on implementing on our ambition is on our Scope 2 emissions, and addressing that first through energy efficiency, making sure, again, we're not using energy we don't need to, but then for the remainder, focused on our renewable energy goal. So just very quickly on energy efficiency, I think this is something we tend to forget. It's not as sexy a topic as supply-side energy solutions, but the simplest thing we can do is try and maximize efficiency. We are doing so with a chip-to-grid approach for our data centers. Starting with, we use the most efficient processors available on the market today, custom-built for Amazon. The Graviton 3 processor is most efficient processor on the market today. Building that into our rack design, and then all the way up to the facility level, we try to make sure that we're using the most efficient design. And we were privileged to see in a study last year that for the average enterprise or public sector organization in the Asia-Pacific region, you could expect to achieve an 80% reduction in the energy required to run your IT workloads if you move those from on-premises data centers into the cloud. That's a 5 times increase in energy efficiency. That's great, but there's still 20% for us to get to a zero carbon cloud. And that's where the renewable energy part comes in. We are certainly focused on purchasing renewable power where we can. I will say, you mentioned we're the world's largest purchaser of renewable power. We have been the last 2 years running. Over 16 gigawatts of renewable power that we've enabled around the world today, which actually puts us as a consumer on par with a good number of utilities around the world. Most of that has been purchased through renewable power purchase agreements, corporate power purchase agreements, which is an arrangement where we work with developers whose core competency is building renewables projects, and then we would pay for a fixed long-term contract with them. So we purchase the power and the environmental attributes from those projects in exchange for them building, maintaining, and operating those renewable power projects for us. That's not a core competency for us. We're not looking to become a utility. Making sure that that is an opportunity has been a real priority. I will say that that's a mechanism that doesn't exist across much of the Asia-Pacific region. To give you an example of this, we just did our first utility-scale renewable power project in Singapore last year, for example, a 62-megawatt solar deal with Sunseap there. It's the largest deal that's been done in Singapore, but Singapore is a hard market to build large renewable projects in. Japan, we just did our first utility-scale solar project there. That's a 22-megawatt project that put together 450 different solar arrays from throughout the country into one PPA. And we also have been involved in the first offshore wind auctions that Japan concluded last year. But that's late, right? In 2021, we need to be scaling a lot more quickly on renewable power development. I will say that corporate investments in renewable power in many parts of the world are the largest driver of new renewables development. It's a great opportunity for developing economies and developed economies in the region to be harnessing that private investment towards building renewable power that is going to decarbonize the grid as a whole. It helps to scale markets for renewable energy for others, but it doesn't cost taxpayers or ratepayers because we would back that investment. We just need the opportunity to do so.
Really, thanks, Ken. And you brought up this issue of direct power purchase agreements or virtual power purchase agreements or certified emissions reductions and renewable energy credits. And, you know, it's a kind of minestrone here. But I want to turn this over now to AES because I think you guys have something to say about this. And that's because here in Vietnam, AES builds batteries. We have Fluence is not very far from here in Bac Giang, which is a joint venture between AES and Siemens. And excuse me, I've got John's sore throat. He's just passed it on to me. With many RE100 companies like AES pursuing their ambitious RE targets in global production, what is your perspective on direct or virtual power purchase agreements, and how can battery storage fit into that?
Yeah, that's a great question and good segue from the previous discussion. So, as you noted, our joint venture with Siemens Fluence manufacture batteries here in Vietnam. Unfortunately, you know, there's been about 2 gigawatts of production out of that facility, and 0 of those megawatts have been kept here in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, Vietnam is a key market for us to, you know, see battery penetration, and we believe the direct PPA program, which is, you know, still in its infancy, is a key way to bring battery penetration to Vietnam. We think it has lots of value for the system in terms of, you know, not only for the user but for the operator, the grid operator, to help curtailment issues with some of the existing renewables in the system. But, you know, apart from that, you have a huge amount of demand here from corporate clients like Amazon, who would be perfectly willing to invest in a PPA with AES, for instance, if there was a framework, right? So if we could get a framework for direct power purchase agreements here in Vietnam, which they're working on it, but we think there's a ton of demand, and we think it will bring a lot of value and will help Vietnam ultimately meet its energy transition goals. And batteries are a key part of that. I mean, in terms of their ability to shape load, to help with curtailment of renewables, which will allow for the renewable penetration to therefore increase. So yeah, I mean, it's a great opportunity. We just need to get the market open.
What do you think's hindering that?
I mean, I think the government's working on a policy framework for it. So it's just time, and I think all of us who have worked in Vietnam know that things generally take time. So we're on a path, but we would like to see that path certainly accelerated.
Yeah. For some AmCham members here who were lucky enough to be at APEC in 2017, we can remember the first discussion about this. And we all thought that, yeah, we're going to have batteries integrated in the grid tomorrow. But it's been 5 years now. And I think part of the issue is this kind of really a discussion on how the grid operator fits in that system. So we've got the potential for like private wire, some IPP directly providing energy, maybe even off your own rooftops with the battery integrated. But the fundamental problem in Vietnam is that most of the solar energy is down in Binh Thuan and Ninh Thuan, and the demand is either Ho Chi Minh City or up here in the north. So getting that kind of virtual power purchase agreement where a user is not actually buying the energy, but is buying what we call the rights to that energy, is extremely important, because that could make it possible for businesses that require renewable energy to locate in places where it's not physically available. John will remember last year, was it last year we went to Taipei? Last year. Yeah, I think so. And, they have these great plans for industrial development. And we asked them, where's your power coming from? And they say, oh, coal-fired power plant. Well, here's the list of companies that'll never have anyone in their supply chain. And they were like, what? What are you talking about? And it's like, yeah, they've all pledged 100% renewable energy. So that's kind of segue to Stefano. Some of us in AmCham have written a lot on approaches to Vietnam's energy strategy in Made in Vietnam energy plans. Ginny is here, John, myself, and some others as part of the Vietnam Business Forum. Last year, we started stepping away from those kinds of strategy documents because in some ways we've said everything we want to say. And that is, if you want the private sector to fund your power infrastructure, then you need to listen to what the power sector wants to do. And now we are really focusing on opportunities and barriers for that kind of private sector clean energy development. So I know you've done research on this, so I'm going to ask you a question. What are those opportunities and barriers?
All right. List is long, right?
The list is very long.
Very long.
We're eager to hear.
Look, it's a combination of regulatory issues, political economy issues, and market structure issues. I would have started answering the question by talking about the power grid, but I'm not going to touch on that because we've heard about it already. So let me focus a little bit on the political economy components of the answer. The first piece, I think, is that there is incumbents in the market. So there is power producers which are across the region heavily concentrated in fossil fuels, and these are power operators that have made investments that have a long life. And we've seen a lot of coal power plants coming online in the Philippines in 2020, if I'm not wrong, 2021. If you look at, I mentioned earlier, the share of coal power production in Indonesia being in over 80%. Vietnam, of course, has a very heavy reliance on coal power. So a big part of the energy transition and the barrier is going to be getting the political economy right and creating a mechanism which creates an opportunity for the gradual decommissioning of coal power plants and the substitution with renewable energy sources. Is of course tough because there is financial implications that go with it, but there's some interesting examples, and we did some work on this for the Asian Development Bank. Some interesting examples where mechanisms can be put in place to accelerate this process. So we worked on the development of the pre-feasibility assessment for the development of energy transition mechanism, which is effectively a financial instrument that allows for the early retirement of coal power plants by creating incentives for the coal power operators, while at the same time injecting capital that can be spent to invest in green energy projects. And so the interesting thing that we learned as part of this study, which looked at Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, was that actually there is an appetite from international coal power producers to be part of this conversation. So it's not really a matter of if, but it's more a matter of how and on what terms, which I think, navigating this political economy is challenging, but there's a silver lining. The second piece, I think, is that making investments in green energy projects is still challenging. You routinely need to deal with multiple ministries within a government. You need to establish trust. You need to understand the regulations. Where there is gaps in the regulation, you need to understand what these mean for you and get clarity on how to proceed. It's laborious, takes a long time and heavy engagement. And so I think this is a big barrier which a lot of businesses face when they want to invest in renewable energy in the region. I think the big opportunity is just going back to what I opened with is this extraordinary level of commitment and enthusiasm for the energy transition. I mentioned the pledges that Indonesia made. I mean, Vietnam, of course, made very bold pledges at COP26, which are opening up opportunities for renewable energy in PDP 8. Thailand is putting in place incentives for electronic vehicles. So there's a lot of action at the policy level, and there's a real openness, which to me indicates that in spite of regulatory challenges, political economy challenges, there's a real willingness to have this conversation and push things forward if at all possible.
Thanks, Stefano. There's at the recent Vietnam Business Forum's meeting with government in February, the head of the mining working group brought up the issue of climate change and rare earths. And this was kind of a surprise to me. And the context was the difficulty in getting mining licenses and the heavy taxes on mining in Vietnam. But his point was, these minerals are key to the energy transition, and Vietnam can play a role in that. Now, I think a lot of us, or most of us, know many of those kinds of minerals and their uses. What's some we don't know, John?
Well, I think it is important to talk about the ones that we do know and the ones that are being used, and it's important. All your wind turbines are running on rare earth. You need rare earth. Solar panels, batteries. And yes, it is difficult to get a license here in Vietnam as a foreigner, but I think Vietnam is also very cautious, because if you look at their rare earth deposits, it's in pristine, beautiful areas. and they want to keep that pristine, beautiful area. So they do, and they look at what's happening with their neighbors. If you go to Miramar right now and you see where 50% of the rare earth that U.S. companies are using inside of their turbines and batteries, it's a disaster, especially the human rights abuses in Ketchen places and things like that. So Vietnam is taking a cautious approach to this because they want to return, as you develop the rare earth, they want it returned back to the pristine areas. And that's the type of companies they are looking to approach and develop their areas. One area to look at is, of course, the defense industry. One jet fighter plane uses 920 pounds of rare earth. And this is, for the very high temperatures that their engines need, their stealth technology, every turbine that you, wind turbine and things like this you're using has a coating from these types of rare earths. GPS, hard drives on your computer, your iPhones, your thing. All these are using rare earths. So it's important that we also now start to look, where is this rare earth coming from? How is it being mined? What are the social impacts? What are the environmental impacts? Because many of you say here that you're using renewable energy, but how renewable is that energy if you're going to be, attacking nature and destroying nature on things? So we have to start looking. So I think Vietnam is taking a cautious approach, and I think it's taking a good approach. Now they have a policy of what they want to do, and they have a big chance. They're only producing 0.25% right now, yet they sit on the second largest deposits in the world.
Thanks, John. Now I think I want to turn to James for, when we listened to Kerry and he said about Vietnam and some gas, we understand that the underlying discussion is about whether LNG is a transition or whether it's a fossil fuel. Is it a bridge to something else? And if a bridge, then to what? And if it's a fossil fuel, then why should we even be considering LNG in this transition process? So my question is really, AES is a power producer. Where does LNG fit?
So, good question. I'll put on my thermal hat now.
Yeah.
It depends on the market, right? So every market is different, has different needs. AES, frankly, we have a few gas-fired power plants, and we're obviously developing one of significant size here. And that's because, our view of the energy market here is that the energy transition will take time. The way that the load centers are structured and the amount of infrastructure required to move power north to south, it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money. And so our view, which means that there is going to be a need for baseload power. Our view is that, for Vietnam, LNG is the way to go. It does, supplement coal, basically. So you'll knock off coal units as you bring on LNG units. So in that way, you're starting the transition, right? You're bringing down your carbon intensity, which is the ultimate goal, and bringing it to zero eventually. So our view is that, yes, it is a transition for Vietnam. It's not the same for every country. Other countries can develop renewables industry much more rapidly. And so, LNG may not be a fix, but here, I think in particular, we do view it as a necessity to start the transition.
Stefano, you have any kind of thoughts on that?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, look, the energy mix ultimately depends on the characteristics of individual markets. So there's no single solution. There's a big piece which I think everyone recognizes, that if we look at a lot of the energy commitments, right, in terms of what share of renewables we want to see by target date X, which varies depending on the markets, we talk a lot about the relative mix of different power sources. But we also know that the energy demand is going to be increasing. So there's going to be, a gradual, there is a scenario in which essentially you will have a greater share of renewable energy as part of the energy mix, but you're not necessarily getting rid of classic fossil fuels because the total demand is increasing, right? It's a matter of ratios. So I think, every market is exploring a different model in terms of, what's the appropriate energy mix. But I think, just going back to the point I was making earlier, there's an element around decommissioning of coal, which, given the current supply available in the market, is just going to be necessary to meet this target. So if you take Indonesia as an example, there's already energy oversupply in the Java Bali grid. So there's a real question about, do we need more renewable energy? I mean, I would like to say yes, but then, to make it economical and not just to produce energy for no good reason, you need to also play on the current supply element. So I think the answer is quite complex and varies by market, but to me, we need to play on these two levers.
John, we got 1 minute left. You know a few things about LNG.
Well, I mean, if you look at Vietnam's energy mix right now, what we have constructed, we are at 54% renewable energy. The problem is we can't get that renewable energy in because we don't have our grid stabilized. And this is the Vietnamese government's policy. Let's get the grid stabilized. LNG is the best way to do that because you can adjust it, you can turn it up, you can turn it down as you need it, and go away from coal, because once you start that coal power plant, it just runs, and you cannot adjust it. So, and the future is also, the government is saying, hydrogen is coming. There's a lot of work being done in hydrogen. And most of if you look at what AES is planning to do, they're putting in turbines from GE that can convert to hydrogen in the future. And Vietnam is asking for that too. So it is a transitional fuel, and it's a transitional fuel that's cost affordable, now.
Okay, Adam will be happy. We're on time. Thank you, everyone. It was a great discussion.